Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. First video of 2022. We're out here at Lake Arthur at Marine State Park. We got a little bit of ice already in some of the shallower areas from 24-hour freeze that just started, so probably no more kayaking for the year out here. But really this video is just going to be about getting into wildlife photography, what equipment you should be looking for based on price, and also what basic camera settings and things you should learn. So the first thing you should do is read your camera manual, specifically about shutter speeds, matrix metering, spot metering. Highly recommend using spot metering for wildlife. Your image stabilization, and read about your autofocus settings and everything that goes with that, based on what kind of camera and brand you have. They have different names, but they all pretty much come down to the same thing. So when it comes to camera lenses, I would suggest any camera lens that's over 300 millimeters, 250 at the minimum. I have a list of camera bodies and lenses down below in the description based off mount and price, depending on how much you want to spend. Very low end here. We're just going to talk about what you need to know to get into wildlife photography. Then if you learn all the basics and manual exposure, you can go break some eggs, make an omelet, and kind of do your own thing. But this is kind of like the basics that help me learn whenever it comes to wildlife photography. And also, this can translate to aviation, to racing, really any kind of sports, indoor arena, whatever you want. It's pretty much all the same idea. So when it comes down to your camera, you want to look in your manual, find out what kind of burst speed it has, and make sure your camera is set to that burst speed. So if you shoot 5 frames per second, make sure it's 5 frames per second. Whatever it is, max it out, make sure it's there. When it comes to your white balance, don't leave it on auto white balance. When you're out here taking pictures in shadows, the clouds change, the sun changes, the lighting changes, I highly suggest you go to your settings, make your white balance in Kelvin to 5500. That's pretty much average for middle of the day under the sun, so that as you take your picture, your burst goes across, and every picture doesn't have a different white balance to it. So if you want to use it in a series or anything like that, they'll all be very similar, and it won't take you an hour to fix the white balance to have them all match. For wildlife, for your camera metering, I highly suggest that you use spot metering. That way, whatever autofocus point is on the subject you're taking pictures of and tracking, it will use that subject to meter with, so you will know if you need to increase or decrease your exposure for that subject. If the background's blown out or dark, or the foreground's blown out or dark, it doesn't matter. As long as the subject you're shooting is in focus and it is exposed right, that's all we care about when we're starting out. So when we go to autofocus, we want to do autofocus continuous, AFC, or autofocus continuous servo. Different brands have different names. Read the manual. They pretty much all do the same. So you want to have that on continuous, so it'll always track and change focus based where the subject is at, and then based on what brand of camera and how high-end or low-end your camera is, you're going to be using either dynamic, group, or 3D tracking, or real-time tracking. It really just changes on what kind of camera you have. Just going to look in the manual, but make sure you're using the one your manual tells you to use for tracking subjects in motion. So for shutter speed, real easy. If you're using a 600 millimeter lens, use a shutter speed 1/600th or faster, preferably a little bit more, but it's really not mandatory. Just do a little bit more. Like if you have a 600 millimeter lens, do 1/750 or 1/800. Now, if you have a crop body and you have a 600 millimeter full frame lens on there, it's going to be a 900 millimeter equivalent. So you're going to want to do 1/1000th of a second or faster to avoid motion blur in your picture. So about aperture, if your lens at the widest at 600 is 6.3, just set it manually to 6.3. That way, whenever you zoom back, your aperture doesn't change and mess up your exposure. Just set it to 6.3. Don't stop down to get a sharper image. It's sharp enough. Trust me, you don't need to, pixel peep this. It's fine. You can always sharpen it in post or whatever. Just leave it at 6.3. We're starting out here. We don't want to go crazy. So when it comes to ISO, so you have your shutter speed set to 1/600 or 1/1000th based on what your camera and your lens and everything is. Your aperture is set to the widest it is, and it does not change. So then with the ISO, just bump up the ISO until the exposure is centered. That's all you got to do. If your ISO is as low as it goes and it's still overexposed, crank the shutter a little bit more. That's all you got to do. Real easy. So some cameras and lenses have vibration reduction if they're Nikon, or everybody else, they call it image stabilization in the lens. If you're shooting a faster shutter speed than your focal, like a 600 mil at 1/600th or faster, for myself, I turn off IS and VR, and IBIS as well in mirrorless cameras. Just get rid of it, turn it off, you don't need it. So in the future, you get really good at this and you want to shoot a slower shutter speed because you don't have a lot of light, Sure, turn on your IS and your IBIS, and it'll help you out a great amount. Just if you're just shooting fast speeds, though, you really, really don't need it. So real quick, let's talk about teleconverters. Do not put a teleconverter on a 150 to 600 lens, because on the widest, at the long end, it's 6.3. You put a 2x teleconverter, you're up at like f12 or something. Entry to middle cameras, they're not going to autofocus at all past f8, so you're just going to lose the whole point of having the lens. It's just going to be a manual focus lens on a DSLR, which is terrible, and it's going to be really hard to nail anything in focus with that, unless they're stationary, not going anywhere. But if you have a high-end DSLR like a D5 or like a mirrorless camera, they do pretty good for it, so you can try it. But just to warn you, you will lose a lot of light. You will jack the ISO up really high, and you're going to get a noisy image. So in my mind, not really worth it. That's another thing. I don't understand why Canon came out with like an 800 f11 or 600 f11. Sure, they're affordable, $700-800, but you're going to have such noisy images if you're in the forest. Unless you're out in the open blue skies and a lake, sure, they're fine. But they're weird. And they don't even have a changeable aperture. They're just f11. You can't do anything else about it. They don't go higher. It's weird. So then the subject comes down to full frame or crop bodies. If you're entry level, you want to get into this, get a crop body with a 150 to 600. It'll give you a 225 to 900 lens with a full frame lens without using a teleconverter. If it's still not close enough, just walk closer to your subject. Don't just stand there. Don't use the zoom as a crutch. Just get out there, get the picture. If you can't get closer and it's too far away, just avoid it. Don't take the picture. It's not worth it. It's going to look like crap. And for full frame, you really have better dynamic range, most likely. You're going to have better ISO control. You're going to have bigger files to crop in, most likely, if it's higher than 24 megapixel. All the newer cameras in the past year have more than 24 megapixels, so that's just something you got to figure out if you want to spend the money on or not. This is really how I learned, what I've used to teach myself, so hopefully it helps someone else out there. And if it doesn't work for you, well, something else might. Now, if you have any questions or concerns about what camera and gear, what works best together for a price range, drop a line down below. I'll give you the best advice I can for what I know. And happy shooting. I'll see you out there. Good luck.